Welcome to the Holo Health Podcast. My name is Alex, and thanks for checking out today's episode. According to the Gospel of John, we believe that Jesus invites everyone to an abundant life, one that is characterized by health, strength, joy, and peace. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're all searching for. In fact, it's how God designed it in the first place. Here at Holo Health, we strive to align ourselves with Jesus' invitation into the abundant life, which in fact actually is a truly healthy life. You can check out holohealth.com to learn more about this, but until then, I hope you enjoyed today's conversation.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Holo Health Podcast. I have Mr. Alex Cottingham in the studio today. Alex, say hello.
Hello.
Thank you, sir. And we have another guest on today's episode. We're excited for this conversation. I have sitting down with us Mr. Tyler Hannel. Tyler is a pastor at Northlands Church. Tyler, how are you doing, my man?
So good. Thanks for having me on here, guys. It's really excited for the convo.
Yeah, it's going to be great. So we'd love to just kind of kick us off. There's probably a lot of listeners who don't know who Tyler is. So we'd love to hear a little bit about who you are, what you get to do. I just teased at it. And then how you got connected with us at Holo Health.
Yeah. So Tyler Hannel, I'm 34 years old, and then I've been married to my wife now, Nicole, for 12 years this June. So absolutely love the life that we've been building together, which includes two little girls. We've got a 6-year-old who reminds me that she is 6.5. She will be 7 in October. She tells me all the time. And then we have a 5-month-old as well, which has just been like an awesome addition to our life and kind of rhythm of life. It's just been a lot of fun in our house most recently. As you've already heard, I'm a pastor at a church called Northlands. It's in the Peachtree Corners in Norcross area. My wife and I have been in downtown Norcross now for, I think 4 years, and just love the community there. So it's right down the street from our church. So they kind of come together in one big pile of friendships and community and family. And yeah, man. So before becoming a pastor in 2019, officially like full time, I was serving on our eldership team, but was in business for about 10 years. Did 5 years in corporate America, 5 years in nonprofit, which was in supporting the churches. And then finally in 2019, the church was at a point where they just needed an extra pastor. So I said, absolutely. And I've been doing that ever since. Right in time to go through COVID. So it was the best training time to be a pastor during the COVID season as well. So it was cool.
That's awesome. Tyler, and how'd you get connected with us at Holo Health?
Yeah, well, friendship, man. I mean, Trevor and I, we met in the front lobbies of Northlands, and then we had to do a coffee in downtown Norcross. And so he started telling me a little bit about his life and his story, and then mentioned Holo Health and what you guys have been doing. And I've been able to listen to some of the podcasts and episodes. I'm hooked, ready to get through all of them. I think I'm one of those guys. I don't know how you guys are. I'm one of those guys where like I can't like start a few chapters of a book and then like skip ahead or just read the first part and then just go to the next book. I have to start from chapter 1 and go all the way through. So I'm a purist in that way. I'm starting at chapter 1 with you guys in the episodes, and I'm just going to work my way to catch us up to the beginning. So I got some work to do, but I'm loving what I'm hearing.
Hopefully we record enough episodes that you never catch up, right?
Dude, I listen. I'm that guy again. I'll listen to podcasts while I'm driving in the car. So my commute's pretty aggressive. So it's like I got lots of time to listen. You know,
Your 7-minute commute.
Yeah, all the time, and just listening to some podcast.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I love that. Hey, Tyler, I would love for you to kind of paint a little bit deeper picture of who Tyler is, more as a person, and just kind of what the Lord's been doing in and through you, because I know we were kind of chatting before we started recording that you were just so eager to have a conversation with us because passions align. And I just would like to hear more about your story on kind of what you personally do to like pursue true health in kind of different areas, but then also what's the Lord doing through Northlands and just your vision on that as well. So give us a little bit more.
Yeah. In a nutshell for me, and not to go like so deep into my past and life, but I would say growing up, played a bunch of sports, which if you're an athlete, I think we can sometimes have the illusion that we're actually healthy because we play a ton of sports. So like we're not necessarily watching what we eat because we're on the fields or on the courts like 4 times a week. And so I realized I played a bunch of sports, never went to a gym because I was in my own gyms on fields and courts, ate whatever I wanted. And I remember having these 22-year-old, 23-year-olds telling me at 16, like, hey, man, one day your metabolism is going to slow and you're going to have to like actually think about what you're putting in your body. And I was like, nah, I'm never going to die. I'm just going to keep going. And then I literally, I was playing sports kind of all the way up until moving from Eastern North Carolina to Georgia, which I moved in 2010. And I remember the first year I went into working in an office and not doing manual labor, not playing any sports. And in the first year, I gained 20 pounds just by not doing any activity, keeping my same eating habits. And so I realized pretty quickly how much that can impact you. The danger is the slow boil that it does. You don't realize, though, how lethargic you are, because it's not like one day you're 20 pounds lighter and the next day you're 20 pounds. It's 5 pounds, 10 pounds, 15 pounds, 20. And so you just think, well, that's just the energy level I'm supposed to be at 20 years old or 25 years old. And so it's been a journey for me. I think probably 2016, I had a long look in the mirror and I was like, man, you gotta figure this thing out. And it was really like a relearning. I had to realize, like, hey, just because you're not playing sports, there's got to be ways that you do activity. So I picked up a lot of different things. Running was a big part of it, just getting cardio, just to start dropping and shedding weight. And then had a bunch of friends of mine tell me that they weren't doing CrossFit, but they brought me in a CrossFit class. I was like, hey, this isn't that CrossFit thing. Like, oh no, it's not that. And it was like, it's exactly what it was. So they had me doing some of that, which was really good. Hate burpees still, but they got me doing burpees. And so then probably in, I'd say 2017, 2018, felt like I got my physical health in space, or in check. Had probably another year or so where I needed to really work on my nutrition. And I say all that to say, where it's brought me into my passions and called to ministry. I felt called at an early age into ministry, 15 years old, 17 years old, but didn't realize how much, if I'm going to be at my best as a pastor, how much physical health is going to play into that. And it's playing into every category of my life. I realized, because I think, especially if I can speak to people who have spouses, what you'll tell yourself is like, well, I don't have time to go work out because I need to spend time with my wife or my husband. And so I'm not going to do a run, or I'm not going to go to the gym. And what I have found is, if I don't take time for myself and just focus on my physical health and nutrition, I come to that marriage or to that spouse with not my best. And so I realized when my sleeping's right, when I'm drinking enough water, when I'm eating right, I'm not as irritable. My wife likes me more because I come with my full self at my best. And I think we drift towards comfort and fast result. And there's nothing fast about health. I've just found that to be the case. Health takes intentionality, and it usually is choosing the slow path. And we live in a culture that just does not do slow very well at all. So yeah, man, so that's in a nutshell me. I feel like the physical and spiritual and emotional, they're all interchangeable. I don't think that they're separate buckets. I think that they all connect to one another. And so I had to relearn a lot kind of growing up. Played a bunch of sports, thought that I was healthy, realized when I stopped playing sports, I wasn't healthy, and I had to educate myself in my eating, things that I took in, physical exercise. My spiritual life boomed when I fixed that. Yeah. So I hope that answers the question. That was a lot in a condensed amount of time.
Tyler, what are some of the parallels that you have found between pursuing your physical health and your spiritual health? Because I feel like there are a lot of parallels, but just they aren't talked about a lot. I feel like one that you said that we say around whole health is nothing worthwhile happens overnight. That you said our culture doesn't do very well with slow, that getting 1% better, building habits in our physical health, doing that. But that's also the same with following Jesus. What are some of the parallels that you've identified throughout your journey?
Yeah, I mean, you tell me where you want to take this. I think it's fascinating that if you know the story of, let's go Old Testament, Elijah, who's a prophet, has this incredible high in his ministry, prophesies, sees fire come down from heaven. The next minute he's running for his life, and it literally says that he falls into a depression and is like, woe is me. And he has a vision of the Lord, and the first thing that the Lord tells him to do is, hey, I need you to eat some food. So he's like, so there's this connection of going, I think the food have been spiritual and like really helped his soul for sure. But I also think when you're running on empty, physically, emotionally exhausted, you're not thinking at your best. So I go, the guy literally just witnessed a miracle from heaven, the power of God break out. And the next moment he's at a place where he's drained. And I think that there's a reality of nutrition. Practically, if I take it out of the Old Testament just to my own life, I've found that I hear from the Lord the best in my time of prayer when I go for runs. And this is only my suspicion. I'm not writing a new gospel message. I found that you cannot go for long distance running and think about the anxieties of your life and think about your chest burning and your legs hurting at the same time. And so what ends up happening is I mentally drain myself of thinking about all that stuff. I start praying to the Lord and going, Lord, not just help me with the run, but Lord, speak to me. And in that space, when I'm physically kind of exhausting myself and mentally able to clear myself of anxiety, the Lord begins to speak. It's the quiet place that we see in Scripture. And so I just think if you're trying to deepen your spiritual walk, and you don't think that your physical health is connected, I think it's not that you can't have a connection with the Lord spiritually if you're physically unhealthy. It's just going, hey, if you really want to help deepen that, I would encourage you consider these things. Even it doesn't have to be for a run. Go for a walk. I mean, I've had the best conversations with my wife in marriage when we're walking together with our phones in our pocket or not even on our pockets. And that's
yes.
There's that connection anyway. But yeah, I hope that answers the question. I just think that there's a lot of parallels,
We're about to start cooking. You're saying something that we say a lot, Tyler, and it's Alex and I have had so many conversations about this thought. Is one, can you experience life to the full without being physically healthy? The answer is yes, because life to the full comes by grace through faith alone and salvation in Jesus. Yeah. But then to better experience the deepest, intimate life to the full that Jesus offers here on earth, then we have to understand that we have to steward all of ourselves well. And I was actually reading it this morning. Is the Bible app put out a verse that the verse of the day, it says, "Do you not know that you are God's temple, and that God's Spirit, He dwells within you?" And it's 1 Corinthians 3:16. And I was just thinking about that, and I continually think about this quite often. It's like the Spirit of God is literally dwelling in me because of my declaration of faith in King Jesus. So now, not only am I like, my life is a walk of radical obedience to Him, but also I'm called to then steward what I've been given incredibly well, because my life was paid for, is literally bought. So what you're saying is like, I mean, right there. So Alex, you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, yes, I was, when Tyler was talking, I had to mute myself because I was like, oh yeah, come on. Secondly, Trevor, I'll just kind of riff off what you just said as well, is we have said that, like you said, salvation does not depend on your physical health. Like, that is separate. God saves anyone. Where when it comes to actually being a good Jesus follower or being a better Jesus follower, I want to grow in spiritual formation or become more like Jesus, right? I can do that better. I can set my mind on the Spirit when I'm sleeping well, eating clean, and moving often. Because when I am super sedentary, or when I haven't eaten nutritious foods for a long time, or I haven't moved in a while, my body feels stiff, I'm just not super rested well, then it's a lot easier for my mind to wander and drift versus, hey, like we say, when we're aligning our behaviors with how God designed it, when we go back to Genesis 1, that He made the 7-day sleep-wake cycle, that He gave us nutritious foods through the garden. He made us subdue the earth and rule over the earth, and gave us the animals to rule over, that we're designed to move our bodies. When we do these things, it's way easier to align ourselves under just under Jesus, because that's how He designed us to do. But that was really the only thought I had. Trevor, I'll kick it back to you, unless Tyler, you have something.
No, Trevor, Sunday, I preached not this last Sunday, but the Sunday before, and Trevor reached out and invited me there. So I felt like there were some things that I said there that must have resonated. But I think, again, I don't know who's listening as well. If you're not a Jesus follower, we'll get more into the physical realities and emotional, mental health as well, because I think that's a big part of it. But if you're a Jesus follower, what you signed up for is that you're following a rabbi and a teacher. And I guess the question for me is, what parts of your life do you think Jesus doesn't have the right to speak into? Because what I have found in following Him, he'll speak into every single detail of my life. So to say that Jesus doesn't care what I'm eating, or that what I'm eating has not been constituted as a sin, I think we mix this up sometimes as Jesus followers. We say things like, I'm going to find out what the Scripture says, and I'm going to make sure that what I'm doing is not a sin, and then that's okay. Which is like, if you treated your marriage like that, if you treated your parenting like that, like, I'm going to find, like, what is the minimum amount of requirements that I need to do to be considered a good father and not a bad father? I'll do those things. So we're not talking about being a great father. We're just talking about being like, I can't be considered a bad father because I didn't do the bad things. And so that's not to follow. Jesus is going, hey, what do I need to do to be a great disciple? And so Jesus is going to talk about my life. He's going to say, hey, Tyler, just because some have liberties to do that doesn't mean that I've given you those liberties. Sometimes, so I'm going to require this of you. And so physical health is not off the table. It's by no means is it a thing to connect to your salvation, but it is certainly not off the table in terms of something that Jesus is going to speak to you about. And Jesus, who is the Spirit of life, is always going to point you towards health, not giving you the opportunity. Like, oh, you can do that, even though it's unhealthy. I'll let you do that. Like, He's always going to go, what's the healthiest decision? So
yeah. And what you're saying there, Tyler, we talk about, like, health is freedom. Alex wrote a book on it. That's what our program that's upcoming, our 4-week program that, like, we're getting ready to roll out and things like that. And so when we talk about health as freedom, when we increase our levels of health, true health, right, aligning our behaviors with scripture, we increase those, we increase our levels of health because we're removing unnecessary limitations. I'm removing my sleep deprivation so that I then can go be in the quiet place with the Lord, right? And go be intimate with the Father and hear the Father's voice because I'm able. My level of health is increased. Or we use the example of a spouse, father, at the workplace, insert it whatever you want to, and insert any vast part of our health into decision. The idea is like, just like you said, he comes to bring freedom. Like the truth will set you free in spirit and truth.
Yeah.
And Jesus doesn't want us to not experience freedom. And a lot of the freedom, when we don't even think about it, is self-imposed. Like the restrictions that we are limiting ourselves are just things that we are self-imposing. It's not.
Yeah.
Some of them are limitations that we can't necessarily avoid, but then a lot of them are unnecessary and that we continue to kind of dwell on. And then all of a sudden we're like, wow, why can't I do these things X, Y, or Z? But it's the total opposite. He wants us to reduce those unnecessary limitations so we can experience greater levels of freedom here on earth to ultimately go and do what he's calling us to do. One, to love God and then love people and share the good news of Jesus and what he's done.
Yeah, man. It's very good. Very good.
Yeah. Tyler, I would love to hear you kind of riff on this because part of the whole health vision is we want to redefine health. That we believe health is misunderstood, that it's only diet and exercise. You go to the doctor, they're going to give you a prescription drug if you're quote unquote not healthy, or if you are, then you're totally fine. Which we are saying, hey, health is so much bigger, broader, and better than that. Where have you seen, or how have you seen health be misunderstood or misapplied in your specific area of life?
Yeah. Well, I was funny enough, I was talking to my wife about this question. Out of all the questions that we were talking about of where this thing could go, this was the one that I was like, oh, I'm really actually want to talk about this one. Because as my wife and I were cooking dinner, I feel like there's three misunderstandings, but they're held by each generation that's currently occupied. So and this is me painting with a broad stroke stereotype. So maybe I'm not being fair, but if I'm not being fair, you guys can just say, Tyler, you're not being fair. I feel like older generation, so be Gen Xers and boomers, my parents, my grandparents, I felt like from what I've heard from them or observed, and not just my parents, but just that generation, there's a misunderstanding around emotional and mental health. Like I see our generation is far more relaxed when we say things like, I went to my therapist. Whereas like in that generation, if you said you went to a therapist, like some massive traumas happened or something's wrong, where it's like, I hear it and I just go, oh, it's just like, it's not like anything's wrong. It's just a maintenance thing. And so if you said like, where's the misunderstanding? I felt like that generation had a significant misunderstanding of the detriments of emotional and mental health. Some people, so some people think that PTSD only happens to guys who are in the military who saw violence, but reality is that if you suffered emotional traumas, there's triggering things that can happen to you that gives you a PTSD. You act and operate in a certain way emotionally because of what happened to you in your past. And so I feel like from that generation, dealing with your past or going to a therapist, that was kind of like an off kind of word. You don't really say that. From our generation, millennials, I think we're course correcting. I think it's getting better, but I think we were also the environment that we were created in. So 2008, this thing called Facebook came out and social media came out. And so if I had to critique where we struggle or where the misunderstandings are, it's normally towards a relational health. We're super connected, but completely alone. I mean, the numbers speak to that. Suicide rates, isolation, death by despair, all of it speaks to this. Like people feel very alone. And I again, this is my observation of stereotypes. It's just, as I look at it, I go, oh man, I can understand why we're that way. As I was like, we were raised on social media and we didn't know what we had in our hands or what we were doing. So I would say older generations, more about mental and emotional misunderstandings. Our generation, more on the relational health issues. I think we're getting better though. I think we see that. I think millennials love community. And so they're realizing, man, breaking bread with people and going to parks and raising our kids together or going on double dates is far better than being on screens. My concern with Gen Z and the younger generations is I really think that there's a which again, this is why I love this podcast and this conversation is spiritual health. That there's a disconnect. I think this was kind of a tragedy, and you guys could agree, disagree, but I think you nod your head. When we were young, when we were like 8 or 9 years old, we would say things to our parents like, we're going to run away from home. like I'm gonna pack my bag up, I'm running away from home. And that was just a common thing that 8, 9-year-old, kids would do. What they're finding in studies is the runaway syndrome, whatever they call that. They're saying that more and more kids are saying, I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to get to, and so you can say that's mental health, emotional, perhaps. I think there's a very significant spiritual reality to that. I think if we talk about what does it mean to be life and life to the full, we were made in the imago Dei, we're made in the image of God. And so for me, anytime somebody wants to end a life, I go far more to, are they depressed or anxious, and far more to a spiritual reality. Because I do believe in just as much as I believe in a very real, good, spiritual, Holy Spirit at work, I do believe that there's an enemy who seeks to steal, kill, and destroy, and he wants to destroy life. And so anytime somebody threatens life destruction, I go, oh, there's a spiritual reality there. And so I think there can be a numbing reality to this generation. I'm also encouraged, though. I want to always end on a positive note. I'm encouraged because I see that just because we've seen a significant misunderstanding of that spiritual reality, there's a longing that's being raised up in the Gen Z and the younger generations. I think if you guys followed any of like Asbury College, what they saw there, whether you agree or disagree with what happened, the fact that there was this longing coming from 50,000 people to this area was, if God is real, I need to know who he is, which is a longing. My spirit, it's just like what I'm talking about of like, oh, I realize that my physical body needs to get in alignment. People are realizing my spiritual health is in deficiency and I need something more. So you can see the longing of the nations for the things of God. But that's so there's misunderstanding. We can go in any of those directions, but I would say it's not so much. And again, generational, that's broad strokes. As I talk with people, we are very open to talk about our emotional and mental health. That's not been the case as I've talked with people that are my grandparents' age or my parents' age. We can talk about relational health. I see stunted growth when I talk to millennials and Gen Zs because we're so social media driven. And then the spiritual stuff now is most prevalent. So yeah.
Trevor, before I kind of kick it over to you, Tyler, I could not agree more. 100%. I've seen those same trends among generations. What's really cool about God is that when we genuinely follow Jesus and align our body, mind, and soul and how he wants us to, it course corrects all of those problems, right? We see Jesus's example of going deep and vulnerable with the three, Peter, James, and John, but also the 12. He had that relational side. He also aligned his mind and prayed through the entire night. So that spiritual side, he walked from city to city for the physical side. He also was mentally sharp and emotionally sharp. I mean, he wept in the Garden of Gethsemane. He wept when Lazarus died. So he was emotionally in tune. When we actually take our cues from Jesus and become made more in the image of Christ, it helps all of that, right? Which is why following Jesus is the most important part of living a truly healthy life. I do believe that people can pursue greater levels of health without Jesus, but they'll eventually be capped. They'll eventually get to a point where they're like, wait a minute, there is a part of me that I can't help or fix anymore. It's got to be outside of me. And that's that Jesus-sized hole in all of us that's why we say, hey, this is not a health and wealth business. This is not the prosperity gospel. This is a Christ-centered. We're going to align our hearts and we're going to become we're going to experience the abundant life that Jesus has by aligning ourselves with him. So Tyler, I could not agree more. Sorry, Trevor, I kind of took the rein there.
No, I love it. We're all three passionate about this. So I think what's important to note, Tyler, there, and Alex touched on it. We like to talk about how the starting point, the 2 steps, 1 and 2 steps of a starting point of a truly healthy life. First is the correct understanding of who God is. Second is the correct understanding of who we are made in Jesus. So who God sees us as in Jesus. And then from there, Alex and I were talking about this weekend, it is then practically pursuing a truly healthy life through the what we call the 7 habits of health. Yeah. And again, those habits are things that we pulled from scripture, pulled from the life of Jesus, and put in like 7 habits of what we can do on a daily, weekly basis to pursue true health, a truly healthy life. And so kind of shifting gears a little bit, would love to hear kind of about your daily habits. I mean, you've been in the business side, you've been in the nonprofit side. Now you're serving as a pastor here at Northlands, and would love to just know what your daily habits and rhythms look like, for all aspects of your health.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll connect our previous thought to going into that one as well. And I just say, some people think the misunderstanding that the reason that I'm a pastor or the reason that I rep Jesus so much is because I'm a pastor. I'm telling you, the reason I'm a pastor is because I came across Jesus just like everybody else did, and I could not find a more compelling case for how to do life. So I'm not saying that there's not other cases to be made. I came to the scriptures, and I did read the scriptures, but the scriptures began to read me. And as I study the life of Jesus, which is part of one of my habits, is I go, he is embodying fully God and what a man fully alive should look like. And so for me, it's going like, you can say, well, of course he's going to talk about Jesus a bunch. He's a pastor. I'm going, no. I became a pastor. I got to this place of just crazy for Jesus because I kept going, okay, what's the healthiest way to live? And I kept getting arrested by this man. And so I just encourage you, if you're not a Jesus follower, if you're listening, if you're not a Jesus follower, I'm not asking you to give your life to Jesus. I'm asking you just study this man's life and tell me what you see and start emulating what you're seeing. And I promise you're going to start seeing your life start taking different shape. So here's some of the things as I followed Jesus, some of the habits that I started putting in. And it's just funny to look at my life and to see I felt called to ministry at a very young age. And in God's sovereignty, he's like, you're going to have 10 years of business, which impacted the way in which I view my daily rhythms as well. So this is just me riffing. There were kind of 5 habits that I saw. Did you guys ever read the book? If you've not read the book, read the book, Atomic Habits by James Clear. He's ripped off by a bunch of other people as well, like just these guys who have gone into habits, but he talks about keystone habits and that kind of stuff. And so read his book, had a lot of great stuff about connecting our habits with our identity. And I found that to be the case as well. But I say that to say, here are kind of my 5, and I'll hit them all quickly, and then I'll kind of go through them and why they matter to me. Number 1 was community, being mindful of who you're hanging out with. Number 2, reading. Number 3, physical activity or being in the outdoors. Number 4, this one I found most recently. I've been doing it for 2 weeks, and it's been a keystone that's unlocked a massive amount of other values and qualities. But cooking dinner every night with my wife, physically cook, not just having dinner with my family, but cooking a dinner with my wife. And then studying the life and leadership of Jesus. I could expand that last one and say study the life of David and Jesus, David being a shadow of Jesus. But literally not it leads to devotional time with the Lord, but literally approaching the scriptures going, I'm just going to watch this man named Jesus, and I'm going to see how he navigated. Go to the scriptures with that in mind. And by studying that way, it's really unlocked some stuff from there. So do you want me to dive into any of those specifically about what those look like practically in my rhythms? Is that helpful, or jump in?
Tyler, I'm curious about, I kind of want to hit a little bit on each of them. I'm curious about the cooking and eating dinner with your wife one, because of course, the health guys are going to say, oh yeah, the nutritious stuff like that. And I'm less curious about what you're actually making or like what's for dinner. I'm more curious about what are some of the side effects physically, mentally, emotionally, relationally, spiritually from that physical habit.
Yeah. So my wife and I started doing this. A couple of things. We're foodies, so I love good food. And I love creating memories. So we got in a habit. I'm not saying it's a bad habit, and we still do this, but I grew up in a family of 5, and now I have a single girl. My wife and I are both working. And so our eating out budget is there and significant. Growing up, there was no eating out budget, right? So for me, going to a restaurant, and I'm not just talking about like going to Chick-fil-A and getting like fast food. I mean, like going to a restaurant and getting like a nice steak. It's a huge treat for me. And then to be able to take my daughter to do it, huge treat. So we started making that a part of our weekly rhythm. Not saying it's bad, but our tendency was when life got hard, we go to our comforts, and it was way easier for me to go down the street to a healthy meal, even not even an unhealthy meal, and just go and do that and thinking like, well, we're having family time together. This is fine. Here's what I saw, what's happened in the last 2 or 3 weeks. Number 1, we began to pre-plan our week. So we pick the dinners that we have. I like that because I get to pick all my favorite meals with my wife. So these aren't just like, oh, like I could be having a nice steak at a restaurant. It's like, no, I'm going to have steak this week with my wife, and we're going to make homemade mashed potatoes, and we're going to make it a feast. What I found was in the preparation of that and in the preparing the meal together with her, we have some really great conversations. So just by doing this habit, we've had definitely nutrition's been way better. Our financial habits have become way stronger. Our marriage health has become way stronger. And then even with parenting, where our daughter's saying the prayer with us at the meal, so she's the one who's doing the prayer. So we're working and discipling there. And so that's, for me, that's the keystone idea. The keystone habits is going one habit that you do that unlocks all of these. And so I'm going, it's not just having dinner, because we can always say like, oh, just have a dinner at the table with your family, check the box, and you feel like you're doing good. I'm saying specifically, pick the meals out with your wife, get excited about those meals, and then do the work of slicing onions, slicing peppers. Don't as much as you can, don't do slice stuff. Like, get the knives out, do the work, and let it take time. And again, the Bible speaks to this very plainly. Breaking bread together, having a feast. This is what actual communion looks like, is preparing a meal together. It's what Sabbath looks like. So there's this connection between resting and eating, I think, is very interesting. And so for me, that's that one is a new one for me. I think we're going on week 3 of it. And it's such an easy habit for us now that I'm like, oh, there's no way it's stopping. I love it way too much. Yeah, it's been really helpful.
Yeah, I think that's so cool. The whole concept of like sitting at a table, breaking bread with people, I think about like one of the most powerful ways Jesus cultivated community, which Cultivate Communities have at 6 for the 7 Habits of Health at HOLA, was at the table with his disciples, breaking bread. And I just think you talk about getting back to community. I think the deepest levels of community happen at the table. I've journaled a lot about those things. It happens over food, could happen over coffee, but it's happening at a table where people sit and have to slow down and like be with one another. I think that's awesome. What, when you talk about digging into the life of Jesus, can you give me like or the listeners especially, like a practical example of like, okay, hey, I'm sitting down, like I'm planning to study this and I'm viewing this lens, I'm reading this passage and then going back and looking over this question, or can you put some, more language on what that looks like for you, Tyler?
Yeah, I mean, I would say if you're going to approach, so that would be my, and these aren't in a specific order. Like I don't have one of them more important than the other. These are just the 5 that I'm doing in my daily routine. For me, when I study the life of Jesus, I'm asking just a bunch of questions. So I'm going, okay, what was he? I think it was somebody made an observation. Jesus was either going to, walking from, or sitting at a miracle or a feast. At any point in time, he's with his disciples. It's like, oh, they were left to go to a meal, or they were coming from a meal, or they were sitting at a meal, or he was doing a miracle. So those are the 2 things. So I look at the text and I go, okay, what's happening in this moment right now with Jesus? What is he calling his disciples to and why? And then I ask the question, how do I actually apply that into my everyday life? So an example could be, Jesus is with his disciples. I think it's I know it's in the book of John. I can't remember the exact chapter, but he's talking to his disciples and they're bickering among each other about who's the greatest among them. And Jesus doesn't just say, hey, stop doing that. He actually, in fact, he doesn't say, hey, we don't talk about that. He goes, okay, hey, if you want to be great in my kingdom, let me tell you. So he literally is like, I'm going to tell you how to be great. He doesn't say that, hey, what a arrogant or narcissistic conversation we have. And he goes, all right, you want to know what it is to be great in my kingdom? And then he makes a comment about government officials and politics. And he goes, some people rule over others. And he just describes, they lord it over the other people. And then he goes, but not so with you. He goes, if you want to be great in my kingdom, you're going to serve low. And so immediately I go, oh man, so then in order to be great in the kingdom of God, in order for my life to count, because I think that's what people often talk about. I want my life to have impact. I want my life to count. In order for it to count, whatever I decide to do, whether it's my career or purpose statements, it has to be laced with humility and service. If you're going to have a great life. And so it's little things like that when I'm asking the question, I try my best to go, Jesus said something, and then go, what does that look like in my life specifically? And so then it's you zoom it, you just keep going from what Jesus said and you keep zooming it as far into your own life as possible. And I go, okay, so that means for me, we live in a culture where humility is something that's on a mission statement kind of wall. Nobody's going to disagree with you that you shouldn't have a humility or integrity in your business or anything like that. But going, okay, what does that actually look like in a culture where we have social media and brand influence and trying to build brands or whatever? What does it look like for us to do those things in a way that's God honoring? I'm a pastor and I live in the Bible Belt. And so there's lots of great churches and big churches and there's celebrity pastors and all this kind of stuff. And I go, okay, but what does Jesus say about me? Not about what other pastors are doing. How does he want me to operate in humility and service? And so it's going to make me look very different. I'm going to walk a path very different from other pastors and they're going to do it different from me, because we're asking similar questions, but we're getting different answers from a rabbi. This is how you ought to do it in your context in 2023 in Georgia from there. So I don't know if that answers the question, but practically as I'm studying Jesus's life, I'm just asking the question, okay, what did he say to do? And then I have to take away some of not the context of what he was preaching into, but bring it into the context that I'm in. And then that requires me to do certain practices that honestly, every time I start a practice from the life of Jesus, it always starts out uncomfortable. It's like, hey, you're going to do that. You're going to cook dinner with your wife. I go, you're probably going to fight about the menu. You're probably going to fight about how someone's dicing the onions wrong or whatever. And I'm going, that's probably normal, but keep fighting through those realities because doing practices that Jesus is calling you to do are going to start off uncomfortable, maybe even painful, but that's the necessary slow reality to progress, you know?
So Tyler, we're kind of rounding third and coming home on this conversation. This has been phenomenal. Thank you for your time and insight. I'd love to kind of riff off this, and we can kind of end with the final takeaway. Health can be hard for a lot of people in a lot of different ways. What have you found is a common struggle for people that want to pursue greater levels of spiritual health, physical health? What would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak to my struggles, and then I'll go before I'm like, you know what your problem is? I don't know. So, I don't know if I'll speak to mine, and then I'll tell you what struggles Trevor has, because that's not. I'm just kidding. No, I'll tell you what's wrong with that guy. No, I think we all have struggle. Like as I said, health is intentional and it's slow. And so to say that everybody's going to struggle with something. Here's my struggle. I am by nature, and again, I don't know if you guys follow anything like personality assessments or Enneagram and that stuff. I am a 1 on the Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, ENFJ, which for me is I'm an idealist. It's why people go, oh, you're either in sales or you're a preacher. And I go, makes sense. What that means is I see things in black and white. It just is. So you don't have to try and inspire me to the rules. Just tell me the rules and I'll follow it. So I always joke with people. I go, I know exactly who I am in the Bible. I'm a Pharisee or the older brother in the prodigal son. I go, tell me the rules, Dad. I'm going to follow it. And people are like, well, that seems like a savior complex and a great. I go, it's the worst, because those are the guys who Jesus hated the most, like who he railed against. He's like, you called them vipers, And so for me, being the idealist, seeing the world black and white, hey, what should we do and not do? My wife, she did some virtual therapy work. She's a content manager. She worked for a virtual therapy company during COVID, which was booming, obviously, in that time, because people weren't going to offices. They were doing exactly this. And part of the perks of her job was we actually were able to get free therapy service in that time. So I'm like, I'm going to totally go hook up and see a therapist and figure it out. And I'll never forget what one of the guys said as we were having a session. I'm walking him through some of this stuff and some of my struggles. And he said, Tyler, the more I talk to you and get to know you, he said, you have a deep desire for health, which is great. He goes, you're competitive. You have a hunger to constantly have the edge. And he goes, but what I've found is that most guys who are competitive, they treat their life like a machine. And this guy's not a Christian. I thought, man, this thing will preach. He goes, you treat life like a machine. And I've found that most of the time life is far more like a garden. And what he meant by that was, he says, you'll come to life and you'll take the buckets that we've talked about, mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, and you'll start checking the machine to go, how are my system levels going? And you start checking the boxes and you're making sure that all the levels are perfectly balanced at all point in times. And he goes, the reality is life is this out of control garden. And he said, for gardening, you'll look at certain plants and those plants are not to be touched during the winter time. And other time plants over here, they're supposed to be managed. And he goes, so the goal is not to constantly make sure that every one of these buckets is healthy and balanced and going to perfect. It's going, hey, you may be in a season right now. If you're listening, you may be in a season right now where the biggest thing you need to focus on is not your physical health, it's your marriage. Because your physical health, it's not that it's unimportant. It's going, hey, you can maintain it for a season and go, hey, I'm not going to go to the gym 4 times a week. I'm just going to go for walks with my wife 5 times a week with her. We're going to do these 30-minute, maybe I do a 30-minute run, and that's all the working out that I can do. And for some of you guys who are like, I love working out, I love getting arrested, you're like, you're asking me to kill myself. You're asking me to give up something that I truly love. And I'm going, Jesus said, if your eye causes you to stumble, you should pluck it out. Better for it to go. And so for me, I'm going, sometimes we treat other aspects of life going, well, this is the healthy thing to do. And I'm going, ask yourself, what season am I in? I'm an early parent right now. If Tyler had it his way, I'd be doing Murph workouts every other day. I love high intensity stuff that takes 45 minutes to an hour and a half. I don't have an hour and a half usually. I can get maybe one of those in a week. I can't do those like I used to when there wasn't kids. So I'm going, if you're in a season where you don't have kids, the parenting thing is not necessary now. Absolutely devote your time to working out. But what I found is that I was getting so amped up about making sure that my physical health, my spiritual health, my emotional, my mental, all of these things were, and it was exhausting me, emotionally drained. And Jesus said, I've come to give you life and life to the full. And so if you're in pursuit of health, but in that pursuing, you feel overwhelmed, anxious. I mean, this is what Jesus literally said, if you are weary and heavy laden, come to me and I'll give you rest. So pursuing health is hard and slow, but it should not be so overwhelming that you don't have any peace. You're filled with anxiety. And so that was a breakthrough for me. Was the thing that I struggled with was I'm going, hey, Tyler, you know what you should be doing in terms of your physical health, your spiritual health, but you're not going to be able to spend every single Monday. Like I'm the guy who like, I'll eat oatmeal on Monday. I'll have, egg whites on Tuesday, and just, I'll live my life like a machine and be totally fine with that. But life will not allow you to be like that, because we weren't made machines. We were made of dust and eternity. We were made in the garden. And so I think giving yourself permission to go, okay, hey, as you're hearing us talk about these areas, what are the areas that I should be focusing on right now? And what are some areas it's okay that I don't hit them all headlong right now in this moment? I'm going to give them time, and I'll address them in the right and proper season. So that's where idealists for me is the big issue,
Tyler, one, thank you so much for sharing that. Before I kind of kick it to Trevor, I wanted to comment specifically because what you just said and the struggle that you have inside is not only the same one that I share, but it's actually the motivation on why I started Holo Health, the exact same. So I'm a 1 on the Enneagram. I'm the exact same thing in the Myers-Briggs. And
it just means we're right, bro. It just means we're right.
Literally. Well, that's my problem. I think I'm too right. I realize that at our inner core, we want to be so right and we want to be so perfect in every area. And that's part of the reason, not but part of the reason I wanted to start Holo Health is because not only do I want to physically, mentally, emotionally, relationally, spiritually be perfect, it's ultimately unattainable. It's God or Jesus was the only one who perfected this life, this side of eternity. There will always be that thorn in our side that I felt like, man, if I didn't have a perfect day in all of those areas, then my day was a fail. Where through kind of like counseling and spiritual formation and mentorship of mine, what I realized is that God's grace fills the gaps. That unless I am reminded of his grace every single day, I have that Pharisee-like mindset as well. And that the go-to verse for me lately has been 2 Corinthians 12:9 of, hey, my grace is sufficient for you. It's enough. You don't need to be perfect. True balance is a myth. Like you said, me and Trevor say all the time, keep the most important things the most important things. And sometimes something else has to give, but our most important things is our faith in Jesus, our relationships and our marriage and our family, and then our health. That my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. That it's funny that word perfect shows up because I'm frustrated that I'm not perfect, but through my weakness is perfect soil for God to show up and his grace to come through, which I was literally just nodding and humming and giving the Christian moo in my head, like, come on, when you were talking, because I could resonate so much.
Yeah.
Trevor?
Love it, man.
So I don't have actual Enneagram because I've yet to actually take the test. But some people think I'm a 1, some think I'm a 2.
What a 6. I'm just kidding. Just start diagnosing. Oh, didn't take it yet. A late adopter. What a 9. I'm just kidding. I don't know. I really don't know him enough.
No, we can talk about it later when we get coffee. But
there we go.
at Holo Health, Tyler, we talk about a lot. Your health is a tension to manage. I really like the analogy you put there with the garden, and that you have to know there are some things that like you have nourished and like you're just not supposed to touch. Like if you touch them, it's actually a bad thing for the garden. If you look at your health that way, like, okay, hey, like my physical health, if I overemphasize or put my attention towards this side, like my relational health with my spouse is going to suffer. Like my marriage is going to suffer. And the same reality is true. And I love, Alex and I, like you said, talk about it all the time. You keep the main things. Obviously, our walk with Jesus is so vastly more important to our health. As scripture says, like physical training is of some value, but spiritual training and nourishing and formation is so much more important. And so I just love this entire conversation. And honestly, I wish I was taking notes this whole time, but it's a podcast. So I can always go back and listen to it and just take more notes. But I think would love to just have you share, Tyler, with the listeners one takeaway that these people who are listening and want to pursue a truly healthy life, what would you leave them with?
Yeah, I think Alex said it, that grace is sufficient. The goal here is that the goal is not perfection. It's not again, I think the Bible uses, again, I'm compelled by Jesus because the Bible has such a compelling language. So don't treat these things that we're talking about like a to-do list for each day. treat your life as a rhythm of seasons. Like there's spring, summer, fall, and winter, and there's a season for everything under the sun, the Bible says. And so and this is where I have to literally tell myself the opposite of what I'm thinking or feeling because of that idealistic kind of, this is what perfection looks like. And I go, oh, I'm in a practice. I am practicing something, which means I'm allowed to fail. I'm allowed to experiment and try things out. I'm doing experiments right now with my nutrition, and I go, I don't know if it's going to last or not. I'm allowed to try something. I go, that didn't work for me. I'm allowed to do that. If you're here, and that goes with every category, not just the health stuff. There's been moments where I want to be a good dad, and I've looked at it and I go, I've given my daughter enough of my time today. I'm going to allow myself to go for a run. And I think like we don't allow, I go, I've done enough as a husband, and you have to be careful with that because you're like, I've done enough around here. It's just me going like, hey, like, everything that you have in your life is given by God and is to be treated and stewarded and cared for in a way that's God honoring, life giving, sacrificial. And so every aspect, the reason I go for a run is not because I'm like, oh, I did my job as a dad today. It's me going, I want to come home and be a better father to this little girl. So I must go for a run. Hey, we're in a season right now where I'm not going to go out to eat because we need to focus on our financial health right now for the season that we find ourselves in, where we might be in medical storms or whatever it is. And so I would just say to give people grace. Don't think about perfecting something. That's what the culture wants you to believe, wants to give you all the highlight reels about this is the perfect ideal. Nobody has a perfect or an ideal. It's what Jesus said. It's whitewashed tombs. It's not real. It's an illusion. We are committing. What we're calling to is a practice health. Always practice health. Practice it in your physical and your mental, your emotional. What's one thing that you can do today and commit to consistently and slowly that will, if you do it for the rest of the year, will change your life. And there's things that I've literally stopped doing this year. I have a huge mountain of books that I was just devouring over the last 2 years. And I said, hey, you can't devour these books and get your health and body on track simultaneously. So put one of these down for the season and pick up the other one. And I might reverse that the next year. But yeah, that's what I would just say. If anybody's hearing this, we're talking sometimes about the ideal of what it should look like. And don't allow that language to discourage you. Give yourself grace. Commit not to some sort of result of I want 6 packs or I want to have a deeper walk with Jesus. Commit to I'm going to give my life over to a practice. And whatever that leads to, don't think the outcome, think the practice. Yeah.
That's awesome. Tyler, thank you so much for your time. I just know the listeners are going to get so much value and wisdom from what you have shared today. I just want to say we're praying over Northlands and what you and the pastors and the team and leadership are doing there. And we hope to have you on in the future, but hope you have a good rest of your day, listeners. Thank you so much, Tyler. You're the man.
Yeah, grateful for you guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you want to learn more, check us out on social media or visit holohealth.com to learn how you can start living a truly healthy life today. That is HOLOHLTH.com. Thanks.